Welcome to the Building Up Women in Property podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Bangura, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today. Whether you're a woman aiming to become a confident, impactful leader, or you're a leader committed to promoting gender equity in the property and construction industry, this podcast is designed specifically for you. Join me every week to gain insights and inspiration that will leave you excited and confident about taking your next steps. Thank you for tuning in. Now let's dive into today's topic. Welcome back. It is wonderful to have you here. This week, we are continuing our conversation from the last podcast episode where we delved into understanding the gender pay gap. And today, I want to continue that conversation, but I want to move it forward. So today, we're talking about closing the gender pay gap. And I'm going to share with you 5 steps that will really help move the needle on this issue. So whether you are a woman in the property and construction industry looking to help navigate this issue for yourself, within your organisation and within the industry, or if you are a manager or a leader within an organisation looking to tackle this from an organisational perspective, today's podcast will be relevant to you because I think one of the big things we see is we know we have a challenge within the industry. We know that this issue exists, but we're just not sure on what the pathway forward is. And we need this alignment within the industry, and the industry is made up of individuals. So we need to have some structure about the way forward and how we talk about the pay gap and gender equality and gender bias and all these other associated issues in a meaningful and constructive way that leaves us all feeling empowered, but also results in change. Because we have all known for a long time that the gender pay gap exists, right? And we know that nationally that sits at almost 22%. And the construction industry has the biggest gender pay gap in Australia of 30.6%. And we've known that this is an issue for a while, but WGEA's data and the ongoing reporting of this information really acts as a baseline for us. It quantifies the issue for us and it creates transparency and visibility for organisations and industries to really make meaningful change from here. And the fact that this reporting will be ongoing allows us to check in on the progress, and it allows us as employees and as shareholders and as commentators to really hold organisations accountable on this metric. And, if you haven't listened to the last episode, I will link it in the show notes, but go back and have a listen to understand what the gender pay gap is and how these numbers are different to what we have reported on historically in Australia. But as I said, I want to today focus on how do we move it forward. And this is obviously something very, very close to my heart, not only as a woman who has worked in the property and construction industry for almost 20 years, but I now help guide organisations on this journey too. Like, how do we get from where we are right now to where we want to be, which is a diverse and inclusive organisation where gender equality is the norm. And I want to acknowledge each of you that are listening to this. I want to acknowledge you for educating yourself on this topic and for having the interest to move the needle. We can't sit on the sidelines anymore and bury our heads in the sand on this issue, because not only has a huge impact on the well-being and the choices and the freedoms of women, but it also has a huge impact on organisations and their ability to attract, retain and develop talent and to drive productivity and innovation within their organisation. So there is an absolute imperative from a bottom line perspective for organisations to finally take meaningful action to close the gender pay gap. And I want you to think of today's episode as a little bit of a cheat sheet to get you started. And of course, if you want help on this journey, please reach out to me. This is what I do and this is what I am passionate about. So without further ado, step number 1 is about building the business case. So whilst we know this is obviously an issue that needs to be addressed, the truth is organisations are there to make money and they have shareholders and they have stakeholders. And by stepping back to basics and building the business case for gender equality in the workplace, we are able to articulate in an objective and meaningful way why gender equality in the workplace is so important. And in doing so, we can drive equal opportunities and equal outcomes for men and women in our industry. And this is about not only ensuring equal pay for equal work, which of course is legislated but is not always seen, but it's also about how do we remove the barriers so that we can have equal and full participation of women in the workforce, and how do we ensure that they have access into higher paying occupations, access into leadership roles, and how do we work to understand and effectively address gender-based biases that exist. And again, this goes beyond just being the right thing to do. This is not just about fairness to women. There is also the benefit of improved productivity and economic growth when we ensure that women's talents are fully utilised and fully developed, and they have equal representation across all systems of organisations, business, government. And that is crucial to ensuring that we strengthen the Australian economy, particularly given the fact that we do have an ageing labour force. Now, of course, another key driver to the business case is that organisations with diversity perform better. And, some research from McKinsey & Company found that organisations that were top performers in terms of gender diversity within their executive leadership teams were more likely to achieve above average profitability, as well as those same organisations having more women in higher revenue generating roles. This research has been consistent across numerous studies that diversity does drive better decisions that lead to increased productivity and increased innovation. So we know it is good for profitability, and we also know it is good for business in terms of organisational reputation, and that is increasingly important with younger generations. And it is a factor that they consider when they are looking at their next role, when they are looking at where to build their career. And that allows businesses then to tap in and attract new talent. And the cost of attracting and retaining staff is so significant for a business. And I think all of these reasons demonstrate why there is such a good business case for businesses and organisations to prioritise gender equality within their workplace. But it's still a process that needs to be gone through. It is really important that organisations do sit down and actually take the time to look at how this applies to their specific circumstance. And in doing so, it engages stakeholders and it provides a clear strategic driver for organisations to pursue this. Which leads into the second point, which is around securing leadership commitment. Now, when we talk about equality strategies within an organisation, particularly within property and construction, which are so heavily male-dominated industries, it is so crucial that leadership are engaged and committed and have buy-in to the strategy. That means across all levels of the organisation, but starting with the board, with the CEO, and with that executive leadership team, because this will set the agenda and the metrics for success in this area. And what needs to be clear is what are the metrics, what are the data, and what are the indicators of progress, and what is the timeline for this. So it's actually having the clear objectives and the specifics about what is going to be achieved. And with that leadership buy-in is how we get funding and resourcing for rolling out these changes. And the issue of gender equality needs to be at the forefront of their thinking and be a consideration of talent management and promotion and remuneration within the business. And we need to see leaders role modelling this behaviour. What is acceptable and what isn't? And that can be done in so many different ways, from advocating and utilising different types of leave, as well as calling out when there is an absence of diversity or equity within a business. And, I heard a great story about Campbell Hannon, who is the CEO of Mirvac, of him walking into meeting rooms and being confronted with the CEO of Men and actually walking out because there was not enough diversity in that room, and openly challenging that, and in the process really holding the organisation and everyone in it to a higher standard for what is acceptable and how teams and groups need to be made up of more diversity. And when we see leaders doing things like that, that embeds into the culture of an organisation, which is really, really important. Now, once we have all that, we have the business case, we have leadership committed to closing the gap and pursuing gender equity within the business. We then need to have a comprehensive strategy. And of course, there's several parts that go into that. So the first is really understanding where an organisation sits at the moment. So with the WGEA reporting, that has given organisations a clear baseline to move forward. But we also want to be thinking about what are the focus areas within this organisation, and depending on the size of the organisation and where they are on their journey, there are different things that you may want to be considering. And this is about things like specifically how do we close the gender pay gap, but it's also about how do we mainstream flexible working? How do we support and promote professional development to our team? How do we apply a gender lens to our policies and to our strategies? And, the list goes on. There are any number of things that need to be considered. But in going through and really thinking about these things, it helps the organisation form a vision for what they are working towards and how they are going to get there. And there's actually a fantastic WGEA document around developing a gender diversity strategy, which I'll link to in the show notes. If you haven't seen it, it's a really easy to follow document, but it's really worthwhile having a look at, particularly if you are a people leader. And I think once you sort of have that strategy and you're clear on what the objectives are, you need to talk about it and you need to be transparent within the organisation, with the team, around what that means and what the future looks like. Because again, going back to the release of the information from WGEA, which did really provide an insightful look into organisations over 100 people in Australia. And I know, talking to many people, that whilst many organisations did talk about the data, lots of people left those conversations feeling like they didn't know what the way forward was. I think that's such a shame, but I think it's also a huge opportunity for you to initiate that conversation, to start asking those questions of, well, where do we go to from here? And also, if you are a leader, like, what is the plan? We appreciate that this is not something that will change overnight. It will take work, it takes planning, it takes consideration and execution. But we need to start from somewhere, and being open and having meaningful conversations about this is really crucial. And having clear goals to work towards allows people to engage in this topic. And of course, what we measure or what we track, we improve. So having the strategy and clear objectives front of mind will really create alignment throughout the business, which again takes us to step 4. So step 4 is about fostering an inclusive and supportive culture. And I think it's important to acknowledge that as we talk about gender diversity, in fact, as we talk about all kinds of diversity within the construction and property space, it can be very confronting for many of the people who have been in the industry for a long time. And specifically, I'm talking about older white men. And I think we do need to be cognizant, and whilst I do love to bang on about the patriarchy and the systemic failures of the system, we have to recognise that each of us is a human and each of us is trying to do the best we can in life. And when presented with changes to the industry and to how we work, not everyone has the willingness or the understanding to buy into these initiatives in the first instance. And whilst I'm certainly not making excuses for bad behaviour, I do think as a movement, we will get further by ensuring we bring everyone on the journey with us, and that we have thoughtful and meaningful conversations with each other. And that's not to say everyone will always agree and everyone will always be on board. There will always be a few dissenters. But I think by and large, most people, even most men in the industry who have borne the fruits of their privilege for a long time, do want to see change. And I think we need to be open to having really honest conversations with each other and being vulnerable and calling each other out and holding ourselves and each other to a higher standard. And I think the only way that we can do that is when we have a trusting and supportive culture. And, I often talk about Patrick Lencioni and the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And really fundamental to all of that is having a strong foundation of trust, where people can talk openly and be who they are and ask questions and work together to achieve common goals. And I work a lot in this space because I think that whilst gender equality is so important, we also need to make sure that everyone is coming on that journey with us and everyone understands how to interact with each other in a respectful way and to align and drive meaningful change on the gender pay gap and on gender equality forward. If you think about what culture really means, it's about how we do things around here. And in order to eliminate the gender pay gap and to create genuine workplace gender equity, we need to be able to have hard conversations with each other. We need to be able to be open and be vulnerable and call out things with ourselves and with others. And the only way we can do that is when we have a strong organisational culture that is built on trust and respect and commitment to shared goals. And I think the more we start to engage in these meaningful conversations across all levels of organisations, the more progress we will make. Which leads me to the final point, step 5, and this is about continuous monitoring and accountability. So there is no point just having data presented once a year and, a series of graphs that show whether the numbers are getting better or worse. We need organisations to set ambitious goals in this area and to speak openly about them. And I'll tell you, one of my biggest bugbears is seeing organizations use the same images over and over again of their diverse workforce. And really what it shows is more tokenism than anything else. Or, seeing organizations use stock images to present their workforce, because that always makes me think that their workforce isn't diverse in any way. I think, we just need to stop talking about these issues and we need to start taking action. And if you're a woman in the industry listening to this, thinking about how you want to get ahead, I would really encourage you to be brave and to have a conversation with your manager or someone in your organisation about what the strategies are and how they are going to be tracked and monitored. And again, if you're a leader in this space, be open, have these conversations with your team, reporting regularly. Even if things aren't going the way you want them to, people appreciate honesty. And when we can have honest conversations about what is working and what isn't, we can find new ways forward together. We all know there is no silver bullet here, and the road to eliminating the gender pay gap will be nuanced and there will be trials and errors. And the more data we can have and the more open we can be about this, the sooner change will take effect. And the fact you're listening to this, confirms for me you're someone who wants to see change in our industry. And, I often hark back to, 20 years ago when I started as a project coordinator, we were talking about these issues then, and very little has changed in that time. And I think now we are at this catalyst to really move the needle forward. And I can't wait to see the changes that happen over the next few years. So, as I said before, if you do want help on this, if you are grappling with some of these issues yourself, then please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to have a chat about how I may be able to support you and your team on this. Okay, lots to think about. This is a big topic and I'm sure we will come back to parts of this time and time again. But for now, have a beautiful day. Thank you for joining me on the Building Up Women in Property podcast. I'm Rebecca Bangura, and if you'd like to learn more about what I do, head over to LinkedIn and connect with me. Have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time.